Happy Friday, everyone. It's John Lorden here with your weekly Brain Scratch. This doesn't happen to me all the time, but this is a case that actually kept me up last night for several hours. There are some really disturbing facts going on already just in terms of the mystery of who murdered Rebekah Gould. But outside of that, there's this strange component with a podcast that is trying to raise exposure to this. It's kind of this newer trend of podcasts where there is a licensed private investigator, although I don't believe she's licensed in that state, but regardless, trying to raise exposure through a podcast. And it's really sent me kind of thinking about, is all exposure good exposure? I'm really struggling with some aspects of when are things helpful and when are things being used for entertainment purposes. And of course, that's something that I basically deal with on a daily basis here on the channel. But I definitely have strong feelings about it. I mean, obviously, you guys know I don't underscore my videos with music. I don't try to add creepy elements. I don't. And I'm not saying that that's where the podcast is going, but I'm just saying there's aspects of its production that are truly what I consider entertainment-focused aspects, as opposed to getting out solid information, trying to use that information to elicit more tips. That's in there too, but I struggle with it because it doesn't appear to be the focus of the podcast for me. And it does have me wondering, but in one regard, I don't think that I would have heard of this case without some of this buzz that's going around this podcast. To be honest with you guys, I heard from someone that is extremely upset, that's a local to this area, and as a matter of fact, helped with the search for Rebekah when she was a missing person. And there's some people that are very upset about what's going on with this podcast, and it just has me questioning, is this helpful or not? But what we're going to do here today is try to get out the most solid information in the most concise way and try to entice the person out there. And I do believe that there is at least one person, if not more, that has information they can kick in to help crack this case. I want to convince you to talk. That's my focus on today's episode of Brain Scratch. So let's go ahead and get started with this. This is a picture of what looks like a very happy family, and unfortunately, tragedy is staring us right in the face. Rebekah is pictured on the left. Her sister Danielle is over on the right, and in the middle is their father, Larry, and he has become a bit of a central focus in terms of the media around this case, so I'm going to share a bit of his words here as well. I think it's always important that we're echoing the feelings and concerns of the family that's left behind in cases like this. And Larry has been very brave about opening up to numerous media sources about all this. And I just want to share some of his words with you guys here as we're going through this as well. This tragedy takes place in Arkansas, and it seems like the actual point of inflection, I'll call it, the actual place where the crime occurred is this area called Guyan, and it is a town in Izard County, Arkansas. The population was only 86 at the 2010 census, and that's part of what's kind of difficult to understand about this case. We know where Rebekah was staying, and apparently it's a bit of a remote area, and it's not the easiest place to get to, so that right off the bat raises questions about, well, who's going to know about how to get there? Who's going to know that she's there at a certain time? So already just out of the gate, we're talking about a very low population in this area. Now, admittedly, there are areas close to this with a few thousand people. Now, unfortunately, a lot of the press around this, this is a case that happened way back in 2004. So a lot of the press around this has kind of been eaten up by the internet. But thankfully, there is one website in particular that I'm showing here. I'll have a link to it down below as well, where people were copying and pasting the contents of certain articles in there. And this is where we meet the first person who is a writer, a local reporter in the area. He was just getting started. He only been working at the paper for about 7 months by the time this case popped up. It's his first missing person and then turned into a murder investigation. His name is George Jared. He does also pop up on the podcast. The podcast is called Hell and Gone. He does pop up there as well. There are also several YouTube videos where he's being interviewed about different aspects of this case. I've watched, I think, all of them. I've listened to everything that's been released in the podcast so far. From what I understand, I think there's 2 more episodes left for this season of the podcast, I guess you could say. But George is a bit of an interesting character because he was kind of there from the start. But there's a transition that it seems like he's gone through in terms of being a reporter on this to being a character within the story. And it makes me just a little uncomfortable. I still trust his information, particularly from the older stuff that I'm reading, and his interviews. He seems like he's being very upfront. It's just, there's one article in particular that he wrote later, more recently, that he's like talking about himself in the third person. And it seems very strange to me to inject yourself into a story in the way that I'm seeing him do it now. But regardless, let's go ahead and start with some of his early work. A 22-year-old college student was talking with her mother September 19th, 2004, when she realized her cell phone was out of minutes. Before her phone went dead, the young woman said, "Mom, I'll call you back when I get some more minutes." It's a call Shirley Joan Ballard will never receive. A body, believed to be Ballard's daughter, Rebekah Gould, was discovered September 27th in a wooded embankment off Highway 9, 5 miles west of Melbourne. Now, Larry Gould, her father, and her mother are divorced already back at this point. So there is some question, and that's one of the criticisms that I've heard from some people about this. Why is Larry been kind of the face in terms of the media when Rebekah was actually living with, from what I'm seeing, 2 of her sisters, and I'm hearing that her mom was really close in proximity to all that as well. Quite honestly, I have a lot of questions. I am trying to get in contact with one of the sisters right now. I was hoping to actually speak to her before I started filming today, but it just didn't come together. I'm pretty sure we're going to have a follow-up episode if I can get one of the family members to answer some questions. And I've got a bunch of questions. One of my main frustrations with the podcast is I kind of feel like some of the interviews are dropping the ball in terms of asking very important questions. There hasn't been a very good explanation of where this crime took place. There's a whole bunch of stuff that I need clarification on. So if you are one of those family members and you would like to come on and help the rest of us understand this and get the best details out there that might jar someone's memory or move them to actually speak and get that tip in, please reach out to me. You can email me at john, @lordandarts.com, just like it's spelled in the channel name down below. Larry Gould said he was pleased with the efforts of the state police and local authorities, but it did surprise him that the Horseshoe Bend City Police, the only other law enforcement agency in Izard County besides the sheriff's office, was not informed of Gould's disappearance until Thursday. It does sound a little weird, especially they're talking about a police department that's only 20 miles from where she was staying. And Thursday would have been 2 full days, maybe a little bit more, 2.5 days or something like that after the missing person report had been called in. And admittedly, this is, 2004. Technology is not exactly in place for, we don't have everyone connected and police departments tweeting and all that kind of stuff that we do now. But I'm kind of surprised also. Daniel Gould said the family was given permission by Martz to form a volunteer search party at 6 p.m. September 22nd. She said she was angry that it took so long to get permission to form a volunteer search. Larry Gould said a group of family and friends searched areas in and around Guyan and other places. He said the family searched up until the moment the body was discovered. The Izard County Sheriff's Office didn't call me a single time to coordinate our search efforts, said Larry Gould. Larry Gould said there were some mistakes made in the search, but his focus is now catching his daughter's murderer. So even though you can see he's making a very nice statement about the local authorities and their efforts, once we get into the actual details, things are starting to point in a different direction. And I've seen some current comments from him. We're actually going to end this video about one particular topic he's mentioning. And I believe that the tension between him and the police and the investigators in this overall has actually just ratcheted up as time has passed. For the family of Rebekah Gould, the last scene of her life is still a mystery. Larry Gould, Rebekah's father, and his family laid this precious member of the family to rest over the weekend. She was like an angel on earth. Her life was cut tragically short. Her father's heavy heart is filled with memories of a unique daughter who was robbed of the most wonderful experiences in life. Quote, "They took a very special person out of this world. I think she would have made a wonderful mother and a wonderful wife for someone," said Gould. Larry Gould said, "It's impossible to describe the anguish a father feels knowing what someone put his daughter through." So, what exactly happened? What physical evidence do we have to look at? That is probably one of the things that concerns me about this case the most. The investigators have not released a whole lot. The local reporters, there's a few local reporters that have kind of stayed with this case over the years. They've been able to glean pieces of information, and ultimately, these few sentences are about all we have in terms of understanding the physical evidence in this case. So let's go ahead and go through this. This is from InsideFortSmith.com. The details of what happened in that house have never been released by Arkansas State Police, but the evidence points to a brutal murder. Blood-stained sheets were discovered in the washing machine, and a blood-covered mattress had been flipped over. An uneaten breakfast sandwich, possibly purchased from the Possum Trot, which was a local gas station convenience store, sat on the bedside table. Police believe that Rebekah, found wearing only a nightshirt and underwear, was most likely napping when she was woken up by her attackers. The official autopsy report concludes that the fatal blow most likely resulted from a piano leg that was discovered as missing from the home that Gould was staying in that weekend. So you're probably saying, "John, I don't understand what's going on." Let me fill you in. So essentially, she lives with her sisters in Fayetteville. She comes back to this area with one of her sisters. Her sister stays with someone locally. She stays with a guy that she's been friends with for about a year. They met each other working at Sonic, the Sonic dine-in restaurant, fast food chain. So their relationship is still kind of unclear. I'm seeing things that make it seem like they might have been in what most would consider a friends with benefits type situation, but she's staying with him for the weekend. On Monday morning, she takes him to work at Sonic. She stops at the Possum Trot. That's one of the things that's brought up in the podcast. They actually interviewed the employee that worked that day and saw her and sold her a cup of coffee and this breakfast sandwich. And then seemingly after leaving there, she goes back to the house, the friend with benefits house that she's staying with. And then it seems like that's where the attack happens. So all this evidence they're talking about, the bloodstained sheets being found in the washing machine, the blood-covered mattress that had been flipped over, the uneaten breakfast sandwich, it's all found at this guy's house. But we know that he's at work, which makes this a really tough case. And keep in mind, this is that rural area that we're talking about, and this house, I believe, is actually a trailer that is located off some property out there. So the piano leg thing is really interesting to me. There's a picture here that we could take a look at. So apparently it's more like this one on the right. And, you know, I did community theater back in the day. We would frequently have pianos around, and they weren't the best. Some of them were, you know, I'm sure they were picked up from pawn shops, or not even pawn shops, you know, Goodwill and stuff like that. Occasionally I've seen pianos where this leg will get loose or just be completely missing. But because of the weight going on the backside, you don't always necessarily need it there. I'm sure once you start playing on it, especially if you're really hammering on the front, you're going to want it there just to keep it supported. But this is the type of leg that seems to be missing from a piano that was in that trailer. And along with information from the autopsy report is basically concluding that it was a single blow to her head, possibly with this type of piano leg. That was the blunt force trauma that ended her life. There are no defensive wounds, at least according to what we hear. The autopsy report is not publicly available, but it seems like it's kind of floated around in terms of the journalists and the podcaster being able to get their hands on it. No defensive wounds, nothing else really noted. No sign of any type of sexual assault, but due to the level of decomposition, that is somewhat questionable. There's an interesting thought by one of the journalists we're going to touch on by the end of this as well. As you can see, just a lot of strange things going on here. So let's try to go back a little bit and understand what happened from the investigator's point of view as they're coming onto the scene and trying to figure this out. This is from areawidenews.com, who's done a lot of coverage of this case, and I've included many links to them in the more info section down below. A.K. Barnes is one of the other writers that has been working on this case for a long time and trying to raise exposure to it as well. Izard County Sheriff's Office Chief Investigator Charlie Melton was just a patrolman at the time when he received the phone call from Gould's mother stating that she had been staying with a friend, Casey McCullough, that weekend, and they were concerned because she was not answering her phone. The next day, September 21st, 2004, Melton received the fateful call that a college student was missing. He contacted McCullough, who reportedly stayed with a friend the night before after he got off work. Just to keep this straight. So September 20th is the day she's missing. That's the same day she dropped him off at work. He's saying he never went home that night. He basically left with a friend from work. I believe they went to a movie, if I recall correctly. And then from there, they went to his friend's house. He spent the night there. And initially, we hear that he went straight back to work from that friend's house. Now, that becomes a bit of a question in some later information. But the two went to his house in Guyan. Melton wanted to investigate if Gould might be inside, he said. They found her purse, cell phone, and other personal belongings inside the house, and her Chevrolet Cavalier was still parked outside, but Gould was nowhere to be found. Melton searched the premises and an outbuilding for anything unusual. After returning to the inside of the house, the deputy searched one of the inside bedrooms. He found ominous evidence. Blood-stained pillows were hidden underneath the bed, and the mattress had been flipped to hide bloodstains on the other side. Melton also discovered that the washing machine was filled with bedding covered in blood, and the machine's agitator was filled with blood. One eerie object that was discovered at the crime scene was Gould's uneaten breakfast sandwich on the table. McCullough seemed completely stunned by the scene inside his home, Melton said. After securing the crime scene, Melton notified Arkansas State Police and a full-fledged investigation began. The case became a murder investigation, and McCullough became the primary suspect. Now, what's interesting about this is even now with all the recent attention that's been buzzing around this case, trying to get McCullough to talk has been a bit of a problem. The podcast has reached out to him. There's other productions that have tried reaching out to him. And basically all anyone can get from him is essentially a no comment. There was a time before where he did actually talk to a member of the press. So we're going to jump back to that article and see what he had to say for himself. McCullough said he didn't return home after work on September 20th and assumed Gould had gone back to Fayetteville with her sisters. Obviously, that was the plan. I went to a friend's house that night, McCullough said. The next morning, when I was at work, I found out that she was missing. He said he left work to search for Gould, but was taken into custody by Izard County Sheriff's deputies. That's when it turned into a bunch of crap. He used a different word, McCullough said. He said he was questioned repeatedly. McCullough said he and Gould had been friends for over a year when she was murdered. She would never hurt anybody, McCullough said, his voice cracking. I don't know why anybody would want to hurt her. This is and will be the biggest tragedy of my life. He said they met while she was a car hop at Sonic in Melbourne. We spent almost every week together after we met, McCullough said. He would not say whether he and Gould were romantically involved. McCullough said he was shocked when Gould's body was found. I was numb all over. I just couldn't believe it, he said. I still can't believe it. He said he has spoken to Gould's family, but he has not contacted them in several months. He said talking to them is a painful reminder of what happened. The house in which Gould was removed was now occupied by McCullough's father. I couldn't stay there, he said. My dad stays there, but he is gone most of the time. So that's what he said back when he was talking. And basically since then, he hasn't said anything. From what I understand, at least from the podcast, he is now living back in that trailer. I believe he is married at this point and has children. He was able to give a solid alibi that included receipts from purchases that he had made and witnesses. This is what Melton is saying. He has cooperated wholeheartedly and in the past has done several polygraphs, which he passed. Now, one interesting thing in the podcast, she does get a hold of one of his friends, and his friend starts making an excuse about why he might have failed a polygraph. But here at this article, it's being pretty clear, and this is law enforcement speaking, that he actually passed the polygraphs. By the way, the excuse that came up was that he smoked marijuana, and she was known to smoke marijuana as well. So apparently that, at least according to what Casey thought, that could have affected him being able to pass a polygraph examination. I don't know if it really would help one way or another. Of course, I have my own thoughts and questions about the validity of polygraphs as it is, but back to the quote. He has never once showed any resistance any time during the investigation. After a thorough investigation, McCullough was cleared as a suspect in her murder, Melton said. Melton believes that Gould knew the person who killed her. She knew the person or persons who killed her. She was comfortable when she got home. The sandwich was still there and her purse was untouched on the counter. If it was someone who was going to do something besides confront her, they would have taken her purse, her wallet, or her rings, Melton said. And he's raising a good point. I mean, if this is a robbery attempt and, things turn sideways, why wouldn't they have taken her stuff? According to some information I've seen, even the relatively small amount of marijuana that she bought was still there. There was some money that was also still left behind there. So it's not making a whole lot of sense for this being some type of robbery, or even there's questions of if there was some type of drug dealing that was going on. Could that be related to what happened to her? At least with her directly, I don't think so. I don't know enough about McCullough, and it really doesn't seem like people have been able to investigate his past or his connections too deeply to understand if there might have been something at that level going on. The podcast describes him as kind of a hipster type guy, musician. He wrote poetry about his feelings for her. So I don't know that he really fits the mold of being in that type of circle, but you never know. You really never know in these types of cases. According to former Izard County Sheriff Joe Martz, investigators spent 13 hours inside the house bagging evidence. I would run to the Miller store and get paper bags and boxes and label items that were sent to the crime lab, hundreds of items. Those guys put in over 1,000 hours in that case, he said. Her body was found by a search party walking near Arkansas 9 in a heavily wooded area. Area-wide media's reporter at that time, George Jared, had grown close to the case and was amongst the searchers who found her body. I don't think that's exactly how it went down. I've heard him repeat this story at least 3 or 4 times with the video stuff that I've watched now. He came up on the scene after her body was already discovered. And the searchers, I believe one of them was a firefighter. They're the ones that actually came across her body initially and found her. By the time George Jared got there, there was a lineup of cars. He had been tipped off by someone near the courthouse that something was going on out there. So it's just kind of weird. The way this is written, it kind of makes it sound like, he was with the searchers when they were actually discovering her. He came up on them after they had discovered her, but here's a quote from him about it. Vultures led the way. 5 miles from town, I arrived at a heavily wooded spot near a steep embankment. I knew she was in the vicinity. Vehicles lined the road. I saw a group of searchers at the embankment adjacent to the road. I saw Rebekah for the first and only time. She was wrapped in a covering. It might have been a sheet or a blanket. I was told later that she was partially clothed. It was hard to grasp that a woman had been murdered and carelessly dumped, Jared wrote in his recently released true crime book, which is in West Memphis. Izard County Sheriff's Department conducted over 100 interviews trying to solve the case. There have been people who have cooperated with us, and others weren't very forthcoming with information. We have people who think they know something about it and have come forward. It is still a very open case, and every time we get new information, we run with it, Melton said. And this article is actually a bit of a retro piece. This was written in 2016, but it's obviously him recalling his memories from back then. But just know that last statement he's talking about is that it's still an open and active case, which obviously is one of the concerns that, in particular, her father has. Her father's been trying to request records so that he could review what the investigation has found, and he has not had any luck with that because essentially he's being told this is an active investigation. We can't release those records. I'm pretty sure he's been trying Freedom of Information Act requests. He did get the autopsy, but apparently that's pretty much the only thing that he was able to get. Here we have some information coming from Dennis Simon, special agent with the Arkansas State Police Criminal Investigation Division, or the ASPCID. Quote, "I've let it be well known that we have suspects identified," Simon stated. More than one suspect. McCullough, however, is not under suspicion. He was cleared rapidly and convincingly, Simon said. His alibi was definitely a good, solid alibi. Simon also confirmed that the suspects knew Gould, but he would not reveal the motive for the murder. He was also guarded when talking about the site where Gould was killed. Some newspaper sources reported the primary crime scene was McCullough's mobile home in Guyan. The mechanism of injury was created in Guyan, Simon acknowledged. So as you can see, even with that type of comment, they're really not giving much detail at all in terms of giving info to the press on this case. The Gould investigation got a boost when a charitable organization called Because We Care got involved. Norma Gibson of Mountain View is president of the group. "I never met Rebekah," Gibson said, "but the people of Mountain View and Stone County really care, even if they don't know you." When the Gould case stalled, members of Because We Care decided to pitch in and do what they could to help. Gibson said, "I called America's Most Wanted to see if they would get involved. They suggested offering a reward. We raised $2,000, and in the meantime, we had an interview with a television station in Springfield, Missouri. When the segment aired on KY3 TV, an anonymous donor from Izard County contributed another $10,000 for information leading to the arrest and conviction of the person or persons responsible for Gould's death." You guys know it always moves me when I hear about things like this. I so appreciate that people are willing to step up and try to help in situations like this. KY3 also shot footage of the spot on AR Highway 9 where Gould's body was dumped in hopes of refreshing the memory of someone who might have seen something. Larry Gould tries to remain optimistic about a resolution to his daughter's case. A recent mysterious phone call to his office renewed his hope that justice will prevail and the guilty will be caught. I don't think I've mentioned it yet, but Larry is a local dentist in the area. The caller listed names and all kinds of information about Rebekah's murder, Gould said. The conversation was very graphic and very detailed. It kind of breaks my heart in one way that he has to have those types of conversations. That's almost where I feel like it's a good thing that there's now a private investigator that's working in the area, and she can hopefully take in that type of information and then disseminate it, try to get it in a bit of a cleaner way to Larry to keep him updated. I can't imagine what goes through people's minds. I mean, you're calling a father of a murdered young woman and having a graphic conversation with him like that. It kind of boggles my mind. While the search for truth continues, her father is haunted by a future that will never be. This happened at such a positive time in her life. Doors were wide open for her. She could have done anything she wanted to, but now I'll never see her married, never see children from her, never hear her voice again. Then he added wistfully, but I'm never going to lose my memory of her. I'm so moved by this man. Gould's father seeks community help in finding daughter's killer. This is an article from June 22nd, 2016, once again written by A.K. Barnes, who's been sticking with the story. Rebekah, here's a picture of Rebekah with her dog, Lady. Now, this is an interesting point. Lady, I believe, was found at the home. So not only was Rebekah's personal items all there, not only was her car there, but I believe her dog was actually left behind there as well. At least that's what most of the information I'm hearing is pointing towards. As a matter of fact, George Jared seems to be leaning on that as trying to use it as a piece of physical evidence when he's analyzing the case in one particular YouTube video. He's saying that because Lady was there and it seems like Rebekah could have been killed while she was sleeping, that the person that came in must have been known by the dog because the dog didn't bark and wake her up and all that kind of stuff. I don't know. It's not solid enough for me to really consider that something I would lean on in terms of trying to interpret this crime scene. I don't even know if I feel comfortable saying that she's asleep at this point. We'll talk at the end of the video a bit about what I think could be going on here, but this is really tough because we just don't have a whole lot of physical evidence to review with this case. Investigators are being so tight-lipped here. It was 2 to 3 weeks before Rebekah went missing. She was on her way back to Fayetteville when she called her father, Larry, and asked if she could stop by for some advice. Rebekah was currently transitioning from the Melbourne area to attend school in Fayetteville. Now we're getting into quotes from Larry. When she got to my house, we were just chit-chatting and we walked outside on my deck. I was really pleased that she called me because we really needed to have a good father-daughter talk. I was happy that she wanted that also. This was her way of inviting me back into the decision-making part of her life. Now, I haven't heard a whole lot of why he makes that type of statement. It leads me to believe there was some disconnect between him and her at some point. Could have been that she was going through some rebellious years and maybe he kind of pulled away a little bit. That's the only thing I can really get from that, but it is kind of an interesting statement. Rebekah and Larry began discussing life and the direction she planned to take. Gould told her father she was planning to pursue a degree to become an ophthalmologist. They spoke of success and what it would take to achieve the ambitions that Rebekah had. Quote, "As a father, I was ecstatic because she was beginning to buckle down and take her academic life seriously. Before that, it had never been serious. This was a moment that sparked and shined for me. She shared with me her plans, and all of a sudden she said something that every father wants to hear from their child. She said, 'Dad, I'm so proud of you and what you've accomplished with your life. I want to be like you,' he said." I'm really happy he has that memory. After her body was discovered and verified to be Rebekah's, Dr. Gould said he immediately threw himself into planning her funeral. Quote, "The release through crying and those emotions, the body needs to do that or you will really be in bad shape, and to break down and cry is healthy. You want to release, but you don't want to fall apart. So I dealt with the family and the funeral. I dealt with picking out my daughter's casket. My family turned to me for everything. I felt like I had to do that for them and for Rebekah." Rebekah's service was in Mountain View, so her friends would be able to attend. There were people from all walks of her life in attendance. Gould was able to give the eulogy at her funeral. Somehow, he has no idea how he got through. When the service was being given and Rebekah was being talked about, her dog, Lady, would bark. After the funeral and the noise began to fade, Gould entrusted Rebekah's case to law enforcement and began to focus on his family and his business. Depression began to set in. One poem Gould read continuously in the early years after Rebekah's death and credits to have helped him cope was Footprints in the Sand. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that. "Somehow God gives us hope and our faith is more powerful than anything, and that's how I survived," he said. He said the first year after Rebekah's death that though he fought depression, he found himself feeling hopeful and upbeat when he would hear of progress being made in Rebekah's case. "I'm like everyone else. I trust law enforcement and couldn't help but feel like that's what I had to do, trust them." Through the years, Gould has been able to find joy in life. One special moment he was able to share with his daughter Tiffany was at her wedding recently. Rebekah's dog, Lady, was at Tiffany's wedding. She is now 20 years old and was at both the funeral and now the wedding. While we danced the traditional father-daughter dance, we both agreed that Rebekah was dancing with us. We cried together. Toward the end of the dance, I looked at Tiffany and we renewed our pledge to find Rebekah's killer. It was a dream fulfilled for me, and I truly felt Rebekah's hand on my shoulder along with Tiffany's. That moment gave me immediate peace, and I want to believe that the hand of God reached out and touched my shoulder, Gould said emotionally. And now I think you guys can see what I'm talking about, just in terms of how brave and open he is about this stuff. And there's a lot that we can learn with how he dealt with this, and how he was aware of, breaking down was not a bad thing, that his body physically needed that, and how he had to watch for that depression and had to find ways to deal with that. At some point, all of us are going to deal with a significant loss. And I'm just so thankful that someone like him was willing to share this so that it could help the rest of us and give us some tools when we're faced with maybe not something quite as tragic as he's been faced with, but I think we're all going to find in our lives some moment where some of that information could be helpful. Over at Area Wide News, new evidence in Gould murder probe. This is from August 3rd, 2016. Rebekah Christian Gould's killer or killers may have gloated about how they ruthlessly ended her life after she vanished. A college student who claims to have overheard at least 4 people talking about the killing sent Dr. Gould a letter last week describing the conversation. The letter writer also claims that he/she can identify 3 people who admitted involvement in the woman's murder. Dr. Gould told Area Wide Media, "I think the letter is authentic and it's very detailed. The person who wrote this letter may finally bring justice to my daughter, Rebekah." Some details are being released to encourage more leads and tips. The letter writer describes an encounter at Ozarka College in Melbourne before it was widely known that Rebekah vanished. The writer says 2 women and a man approached another man with dirty blonde hair at the college. All were headed towards the parking lot. "Did you get it?" the smiling student asks the trio. The 3 tell him they killed her and dragged her through several rooms at the house. Blood was everywhere, and she put up a fight, the alleged male killer bragged. He also said she screamed a lot. They said they were not able to retrieve, quote, stuff from Rebekah, and they dumped her body somewhere. Specific descriptions of the people were detailed in the letter. As they talked, their voices got louder and louder, and at one point, the male student, who at this point seemed confused and worried, tried to hush them. The letter writer apologized for not coming forward sooner and said he/she could identify those people if police needed identifications. The problem here is they sent that letter anonymously, and they sent it to her father. Once again, why are people torturing this man with this type of information? Many people think that this letter has no merit whatsoever. A.K. Barnes thinks there's something to this letter. I don't in particular know why. The physical evidence we do know about, in terms of at least the autopsy has been reviewed by journalists and we're getting some understanding of what it is. Single blow, likely from the piano leg. So this whole scenario about her putting up a fight, there's no wounds to suggest that there was any type of fight going on. There were no defensive wounds. Even the description that we're getting about what was found in the trailer, we're not hearing that there was blood, going from one room to another. There was blood in separate rooms, but they're explaining, the mattress had been turned over, the pillows were stuffed under the bed, the sheets were put in the washer. By the way, does that bother any of you? If you're going to go and kill someone in someone else's house, why are you going to do that type of cleanup? I really don't get that. And even though McCullough is cleared, that's one of the things I just cannot let go of. And I have trouble with the logistics because obviously he doesn't have his own car. She took him to work. So it's not like he has a way to drive home from work, do this real quick, say that he's going on a break, come home, do this, go back to work, continue his day, go out with his friends that night. Although, going out with his friends and keeping all his receipts, was he doing that on purpose to make sure that he had an alibi? Could this be a situation where he was having someone else do this for him for some reason? That's one of the things I really can't let go of. But this kind of sloppy trying to clean up the crime scene thing. I mean, why flipping the mattress over? What? Why? Makes no sense. I don't get it. And by the way, this does not seem planned. We're talking about an item that is missing from the house that seems to be the murder weapon. We're talking about a single strike, which is another thing where George Jared kind of goes off talking about how rage-induced this is. I don't know how we can make that assumption when we're talking about a single strike. If you're talking to me about a crime scene where you have someone that's been stabbed 37 times, I can tell you we're talking about a rage-induced crime. When you're talking about one single hit that ended this person's life and that's all they did to that person's body, I'm not seeing the rage there. And that's kind of leaning me more to this thought of this could have been someone that was doing this for someone else, or this is something that really happened just in the heat of the moment. And because of the piano leg thing, I'm really leaning that way the hardest. If, let's say, McCullough did want someone to come and end Rebekah's life because she was breaking up with him, she wasn't going to see him anymore, something along those lines, this person's going to show up at that house without anything to do that job. Just kind of, hey, Rebekah, how you doing? Look around, figure out what he's going to grab and attack her, or she's going to grab and attack her. Doesn't seem right to me. This seems like there's something that's nagging me about the fact that she goes back to the house, and the description of the clothing that she's wearing sounds like she got ready for bed, like she was going back to bed. I don't think she went to a convenience store wearing a nightgown and just her underwear. That just makes no sense. Now, could it be that what they consider a nightgown is actually a t-shirt and she just threw on some shorts or, some sweats or something like that? Possibly. But there's something about this whole, she goes back, she goes to bed for some reason. She doesn't eat the sandwich that she went and bought, which, by the way, why did she buy it from there when she was at Sonic? At least the Sonics out here are open in the morning and serve breakfast. And she used to work there. So there's a lot of what's going on this morning that I'm having trouble understanding. I'm even wondering if the breakfast sandwich, is it possible she bought that for someone else? And I'm just throwing that out there because I haven't heard anyone put that into consideration at all. Is that possible she was meeting someone else at McCullough's house? Could she have had another relationship that we don't know about? Maybe she was going to end that as well. Her father talks about the fact that she was kind of starting this new life. She's got this new college plan. She's moving out of the area. She's really trying to cut ties and reboot. So is there another potential relationship that she was ending that same weekend? That's kind of where my mind is stuck in all this. And unfortunately, I don't really see anyone kind of chasing down that lead, but that's just where I'm at with it. Let's go ahead and continue here. So this letter, I don't know. I don't know how much stock I hold in it. Another lead that has come to light in recent months is days before the murder, Rebekah allegedly got into a fight with another female. Dr. Gould heard rumors that she might have been involved in petty drugs or that a jealous girl dating one of her ex-boyfriends may have decided to assault her. That stuff comes out in the podcast. Quite honestly, I'm really not even compelled to share it with you guys. I don't think there's anything to it because we don't have physical evidence that points to any of that. There's a point for me when I'm looking into these cases where certain kind of rumor-based stories, I have trouble linking them to the few pieces of physical evidence we have, and that one just seems a bit far out. And not to mention that you've got a fight that's going on here, and you've got this father that's working in the community trying to understand this. You have people sending him letters, making phone calls, giving him graphic details that are likely made up, but we don't have someone that's willing to call him up and say, hey, you know what? Yeah, I was actually at the party. I saw the fight, and yeah, Jennifer was really upset at Rebekah. It sure did seem serious, and I know what they were fighting about because I heard them screaming. We're not seeing anything like that. So these types of rumors feel very loose to me, and that's why I'm just I'm not going to go into them too much. I'm not seeing enough to make them really stick for me. All right, back to the article. It's been almost 12 years, and the person or persons who killed Rebekah remain free. Prosecutor Don McSpadden said authorities have suspects, but there isn't enough evidence to bring charges yet. It's my firm belief that at some point there is going to be enough information and evidence where someone can be charged and convicted of this murder, he said. McSpadden said he understood the critical public statements made by Rebekah's father, Dr. Larry Gould of Mountain Home, in recent months. I can understand Dr. Gould's frustration, and I can understand him taking it out on other people, but the police can only go so far, and if they hit a wall, then they've hit a wall, he said. McSpadden said he's tried to contact Dr. Gould, but the two have not been able to talk as of yet. If they do talk, the prosecutor said he would love to discuss theories about the case with him, but he won't turn over the state police file as requested by Dr. Gould. It's been 12 years since my daughter's death and 3 years since I've had any meaningful communications from McSpadden's office. It's been too long, Gould said. This should have already been solved. I will continue to put pressure on them until my daughter's killers are behind bars, period. And I can certainly understand that sentiment. So a big twist in this case, the podcast. This is not a podcast that is two guys that started on their kitchen table. This is a podcast by a woman that has a career of writing for several different publications. In her early career, it seemed like she was more focused on kind of beauty-related topics. Then she's kind of moved into crime. She went through her private detective training, which in California, you got to put in 6,000 hours within 3 years, which basically means if you're working 40-hour work weeks, you have to work 50 weeks each year to make that happen. She does all that. She gets that together. She does a little work with investigative discovery from what I can see. One of the articles that we're actually going to touch on here is written by her, that is hosted there. I saw some videos on YouTube that were kind of these quirky, what does the woman private investigator keep in her purse and stuff like that. I really don't know what was going on with that. There's other videos she's put out there where I understand some of the criticism. Some people are really concerned. I've heard that, this is a Bible Belt area, and some of the content that she's put out before can be seen as a little bit racy. I kind of understand that, but it is content that's been out there for like a decade or something. So I myself would not write off someone because, I'm looking at what they've done on social media when they're trying to get their legs under them and understand what social media is and try to develop their audience. And I hope no one would do that to me because some of my early stuff is definitely not my brightest shining moment as well. But what we do have happen here is she puts together a production team. I think they sell this idea to a larger company, and this is a bit of a backed podcast. This is, like I said, not two guys at a kitchen table. So what happens is they do a bunch of press, and it goes as far as getting them on the Dr. Oz show, who I didn't even know was covering true crime at this point, but I guess he's got True Crime Tuesdays now. And of course, we see that Larry Gould has gone on this as well. I have a link to this down below. Their entire segment is there, surprisingly, except for the very end, which is supposed to include the contact information for people that has tips. So that's a little weird. But everything else in their conversation is there, so you can check it out for yourself and see what they're talking about. A lot of it kind of feels like just sound bites from pretty much the first episode of the podcast. So if you've listened to that already, you might not gain a whole lot from this interview, but I did include it down below so you could check that out as well. Moving over to KAIT8.com. This is an article from 2018, getting very current here, from April. A private investigator is taking a new look at a cold case that has left Izard and Stone County residents shocked and confused for 14 years now. Quote, "This was a beautiful girl. She had her life ahead of her," journalist and private investigator Catherine Townsend said about Rebekah Gould. "She had a lot of friends and family who loved her, and somebody needs to be brought to justice for this. It's been 14 years, and it's time." Townsend's sister went to high school with Rebekah's sister, so she heard about the case when it happened and couldn't let it go. And according to other information I've seen, she actually got her private investigator's license specifically because she was motivated by this case. Once again, makes me question it just because she got it in a completely different state, which I don't know, guys. But at least that's what's being told here. Now, from what I've seen, this podcast is supposed to initially be 8 episodes. The 7th episode was supposed to be released this week, a day before I'm actually recording this video, and it wasn't. And now there's been a short, like literally 45-second piece posted that is saying that they're having to take a week off because there's new information that they're working on, and it will continue next week. So from what I understand, 2 more episodes are still going to come out. I'm hoping that by the time I listen to that episode next week, that I will have spoken to some of Rebekah's family and have some better insight. I'm really curious why so many of them are missing from the press around this. We're kind of hearing, like we heard Tiffany mentioned in terms of the wedding, but we haven't heard really from Tiffany for herself. Rebekah's mother does appear in the podcast, but literally just for a blip, just for a minute or two. So I don't know why there isn't really in-depth information or interviews coming from the other family members. Moving over to crimefeed.com, this is the article that was written by Catherine, and this one was written a couple years ago. April of 2017, so just over a year ago. And it brings up a couple of interesting points that I wanted to share with you guys before we hit the end of today's video. On the weekend she went missing, Danielle said that Rebekah was staying with her friend Casey McCullough in the nearby town of Guyan. She said that Rebekah was originally supposed to stay with her on Friday night, but later told her that she would be back Monday instead. Danielle began to seriously worry when Monday morning rolled around without a call from her sister. Rebekah had known that the girls were due back in Fayetteville by 12 p.m., but she never showed up. Now, I don't know if they had a class at that particular time or if that time frame was a little bit loose, but one of the things that I really don't hear people addressing is the time frame of that morning doesn't give her a whole lot of time. There's this assumption that she went home to take a nap before she was taken off for this drive. A nap that obviously she needed so bad she didn't even eat her breakfast, which is just weird in itself. But I'm thankful this information's out there because I ran a little search for the drive distance between those two spots, between Guyan and Fayetteville. And the amount of time that drive would take is about 3.5 hours. Now, we know that she drops off her boyfriend sometime around 8. We know, thanks to the podcast, when they spoke to the person at the Possum Trot that actually sold her the breakfast, that person estimates that she was in there as early as 8:30, possibly as late as 10 o'clock. And it's only because the girl that was working there remembers that it was a slower period, so it was kind of after the morning rush hour. If we put it even at the earliest that she was there at 8:30, that literally only gives her, if she's running it really tight, and that this isn't accounting for her going and picking up her sister, the nap thing doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And that's part of what makes me wonder, is this potentially a romantic rendezvous? Could that be a possibility here? Is there some other person we don't know about? And did something happen that snapped that person and caused them to act out, grab that piano leg that I'm probably thinking was already off? I'm almost wondering if the piano leg was kept in the bedroom as some type of security safety device. You know, if they were worried about someone breaking into the trailer, maybe they kept that because it is shaped a lot like a bat. Maybe it's something that they kept besides the bed or something along those lines. The other thing I'm wondering about, I am worried obviously too, but wondering about is the bed. Is it the same bed that Casey uses? Were they sharing a bed when she was staying there? Is there multiple bedrooms? Is there multiple beds? That's one of the things I was really hoping the podcast would get to, and I just have no understanding of. Admittedly, I had to, power listen to the podcast, so I might have missed it, but I don't think so. I don't think it was in there. So that's one of the things I'm hoping that someone can clear up for us. Was she staying in the same bedroom? Is it Casey's bed that actually had the blood stain on it? But yeah, this time frame about that morning and her having a drive and expecting to be back by noon after going and picking up her sister seems like it's kind of tight unless she was a 20-minute napper, which I do admit there are some people out there that are able to do that. I am certainly not one of them. There's one more aspect from this article I want to touch on as well. McCullough has never confirmed the exact nature of his relationship with Rebekah, but Danielle said that McCullough adored her sister. Danielle said Rebekah told her during their final drive that McCullough wanted to get exclusive, but she was not sure about taking that step. So I think that's kind of, once again, supporting this theory that maybe she was going to end things with him. Could that have been part of their conversation that weekend? Possibly. I don't know. Moving on to NEA report. McCullough still a suspect in the Gould slaying? ? This is an article from October 31st, 2018, written once again by George Jared. And this is that article that just, I don't know, I feel a little weird about, but let me share some parts of it with you. The Arkansas State Police have conducted numerous interviews with witnesses in the last several weeks in connection with the unsolved murder of college student Rebekah Gould, two sources with knowledge of the situation said. First of all, let me applaud there. I'm happy to hear that there's movement on this case. I don't think it's a surprise that there's movement on this case after you're having national exposure on the Dr. Oz show. You've got this podcast that has started airing its episodes at this point. Seems like it's a good thing in terms of possibly nudging some activity around this case and shaking things up a little bit. Several of the witnesses are connected to the only publicly named suspect in the case, Gould's former boyfriend, Casey McCullough. So the article continues. It's doing a little recap of the events. It mentions the morning that she's found, and then it talks about the day after, and an interesting point comes up here. The next day, police decided to inspect McCullough's home. An investigator with the Izard County Sheriff's Department, Charlie Melton, contacted McCullough, who didn't go home after work that night. He stayed the night at a friend's house. I've been told, however, McCullough returned to his home the next morning to grab a fresh set of clothes for work. He noticed laundry folded on his bed, but strangely, he didn't notice blood strewn in the house. He left unaware anything was amiss, or so he claims. It's strange because her car and possessions were still there. Now, that's his best point. I don't know about the blood because I haven't heard enough description outside of the mattress was flipped over, so he might have not necessarily seen that. The pillows were under the mattress, so he might have not necessarily seen that. The sheets were in the washer, so he may have not seen that. I haven't seen any information about, blood being on the walls, blood being on the floor, or anything like that. So I don't know about the assumption that he didn't notice that there was violence in the house. However, her car is still there. And he goes inside, and her purse is still there. And more importantly, which is not brought up here, her dog is still there, and he's not noticing that. And this is all if he actually went there the next morning. Would kind of make sense unless he knew that he was going to stay the night away from home and he took some clothes with him on Monday when she took him to work. But we don't know that because no one can talk to the guy. A breakfast biscuit was still sitting in the microwave. Now, this is a change. I don't know what's more accurate. There's a few articles that are older that are saying the breakfast biscuit was actually right by the side of the bed. This one is saying it's actually in the microwave. Could she have been warming it up when someone came in? Something along those lines. Could it be this thought that I keep having in my head that I can't shake, that it wasn't actually for her, that maybe she had bought it for someone else? Maybe she put it in the microwave so that maybe it was even for Casey, so that when Casey came home, he could have it. I don't know. McCullough was interviewed by police more than once, but he was ultimately cleared of the murder. At the time, he freely talked about the case with Jared. Now, I don't know why he's all of a sudden talking about himself in the third person, but they mean the author of the same article that I'm reading. But in recent years, he has steadfastly refused to return Jared's phone calls and messages. The veteran journalist said it's strange that he refuses to talk to anyone about the case. Gould was killed from a single blow to the head, and the murder weapon was likely a loose piano leg inside McCullough's house, according to the autopsy report. There were no signs that she had been sexually assaulted, but the report noted that the advanced decomposition of her body made it hard to determine if she had been sexually assaulted. I don't like the R word, and I don't think YouTube does either. Jared thinks she wasn't because she still had a shirt and panties on when she was found. I don't know that that is an indicator that a sexual assault didn't happen. And I don't want to get too graphic with it, but I think you can still have a sexual assault and you can actually leave the panties there. I don't think, this is the kind of stuff that drives me a little bit nuts. I know that we're short on physical evidence here, but making conclusions like this, I don't know. I don't know about this. Now, I'll tell you what's much more compelling than that, and I'm actually agreeing with him that I'm not sure that a sexual assault happened here either. There was nothing noted, at least from what we're told, in the autopsy about her having bruising on her wrist or bruising on her inner thighs. There are certain indicators that seem to happen when it comes to sexual assaults, and at least from what we're being told, I'm not hearing of any of those indicators. I would much rather lean on that as a sign that she was likely not sexually assaulted than, her panties were on and there's no way someone would have put her panties back on. It's just, that's not enough for me personally. McCullough reportedly lives in the same house where Gould was murdered. So he's back in that house now. For years, police honed in on a Mountain View man and interviewed him numerous times. The man, first name is Chris, vehemently denied any involvement when interviewed in the podcast series Hell and Gone. And yeah, for some reason, the podcast won't use his last name. And here we have George Jared not using his last name, but there's articles about this guy that spill his last name. And here's a picture of him. So over at whiterivernow.com, Mountain View man behind bars after threatening man regarding woman's murder. According to information filed Monday in Stone County Circuit Court, and this is October 10th, 2018, Christopher B. Cantrell, 37 of Mountain View, was at the residence of Tommy Morrison on September 25th. Interesting date because that's within that week where she was missing, but of course we're now talking 14 years after the fact, when he learned Morrison was going to the home of Mariah and Justin Gullett to visit. Gullett is the former boyfriend of Rebekah Gould, the 2004 homicide victim. So that story we heard earlier about possibly Rebekah getting in a fight with a girl that was now with her ex-boyfriend, Justin is this ex-boyfriend. Morrison told authorities Cantrell said he would go with Morrison to the residence, but did not tell Morrison why. Morrison rode in his truck with Cantrell driving. Upon arrival, Cantrell parked the truck behind the Gullett residence. Mariah Gullett told investigators when she answered the back door, Morrison entered and then Cantrell pushed his way into the residence and put the Gullett telephone in his pocket. Justin Gullett was at the store at the time, but when he returned to his home, he reported he was confronted by Cantrell, quote, in regards to Gullett making statements to law enforcement about Cantrell's possible involvement in the murder of Gould. And that quote is from court papers. And that Cantrell threatened to kill Gullett if he continued to give statements. Gullett's wife said she heard, quote, Cantrell state he would cut Justin's throat and that he would kill him if he continued to make statements. Morrison also told investigators he witnessed Cantrell threaten the life of Justin Gullett as well. After the threat, authorities say Justin Gullett escaped his residence and contacted law enforcement from the neighbor's phone. Cantrell is charged with residential burglary, intimidating a juror, a witness, or an informant, terroristic threatening in the first degree, and interference with emergency communication in the first degree. Cantrell was admitted to bail in the sum of $50,000. Now, this guy is probably one of the most controversial aspects of the podcast, at least from what I'm hearing of critics of the podcast, who, by the way, say that there's a circle of people in the local community that think that the podcast is basically a joke at this point. Chris is interviewed by Catherine in the podcast. And leading up to the interview, she's super nervous. She talks about how he looks and his eyes and, that they're potentially going and speaking with a murderer. After they speak to him, she does a complete 180 and, by her own words, says that it's primarily because he was willing to talk to them and he seemed to get teary when he was talking about this. And from that point forward, he is just not a consideration for her in terms of possibly being involved here. And what's weird is some of those episodes actually come out after this news story. In one of the episodes, they address the fact that he's been arrested, and they're just completely baffled and like, oh my God, they don't even have anything on him. And, people are saying that he was just over at the house. He just went over to hang out. And then this stuff all kind of happened. Then there's some really interesting lies that are being concocted in these court documents. I'm not saying that's impossible, but what I'm seeing here, there's more charges than the podcast was talking about. It's not just residential burglary. There's several charges. I've already read them to you. I'm not going to read them to you again. But the main thing that bothers me in the podcast that I've heard so far is discounting him possibly as being related to this case simply because he was nice to you in a conversation and you thought you saw his eyes getting weepy while you were talking about it. If you have been around people that are very good at manipulating others, that's an everyday task for them. Some of these people rely on the fact of manipulating others. Think of it as a magician. Think of what a magician can do just by pulling your attention different directions while something else is happening. People, especially career criminal type people, have to develop that same type of methodology. They have to know how to be able to make you think something specifically so that you can be taken advantage of in some way. And the other aspect of thinking, well, if he was really involved, then he would just say no comment. He'd kind of do what McCullough's doing in this case. Not necessarily. Some people become infatuated with the case. They have to stay close to it. They try to inject themselves into criminal investigations. Sometimes they need to do that as an act of self-preservation. They need to talk to the person that's doing the investigation, hopefully guide their view of the investigation, but more importantly, learn information about what they're looking into, what they might be looking into next in case they have to do anything to head that off. So that's probably the most shocking thing for me. And, I've worked now with a couple of different private investigators on projects with the channel. I've got another big project next year coming up with one. I'm very surprised to hear that someone that has the experience that Catherine says she has kind of just turn her have a blind eye towards that. It's a big blind spot, and I wouldn't have let that go. There's no direct quotes, but what it sounds like Catherine is hearing, the police are really focused on Chris as being the person. And it might be that she's having some kind of reflex reaction to that. And that's part of why she's trying to discount him so hard. I don't know. At the start of this video, I told you the father was making a very good point at kark.com. This is the video. There's a link to it down below. But he's basically talking about the fact that he hasn't been able to get access to the case file, and it's because they're saying that it's still active. Now, according to some of those recent articles, it does seem like there's some activity going on around this case. But this is a man that's been trying year after year for over a decade at this point. So I totally understand it. I really wanted to point this out because he's making a point in this video that I've talked about on this channel several times, and that is that there should be some mechanism for identifying what is truly a cold case or what is truly an active case that doesn't happen within the same department that is processing that case. There needs to be some check or balance put into place that looks at that, someone reviews it. Maybe if there's been no interviews conducted for the last 5 years, maybe if there's been no pieces of new evidence found for the last 5 years, there needs to be some set of conditions that automatically changes the status of that case. Because without that, there's a benefit to the person, to the department that's working the case, to always say that every case is currently active, because no one will ever go through their files. They will never be critiqued for their work. And is that really the best kind of thing? I don't know. When you have a case go on for 14 years, that seems like a relatively simple case, a single blow, a single item used, and it can't get cracked. I would like to think that someone else out there is able to pick that up at some point and roll forward with it. And maybe it should be private resources. Maybe it should be a private investigator, but there's no automatic mechanism to allow that to happen. This case could sit in this active status and not get solved for another 14 years. And that sounds like a nightmare to me. Before we sign off here, I do want to tell you guys there's one other important aspect to this. If the piano leg is the item that was used, I don't believe it's around anymore. And there's been a few searches that have happened in water sources. If they're looking for that piano leg, I don't quite understand why they're searching water sources. From what I understand, most wood floats in water. So if I was going to ditch that piano leg, the last place I would put it in is a water source. What I would probably do is have a little fireplace somewhere, personal fire in the backyard, no one else with me, no one else around. That piano leg would be gone within a matter of 30 to 45 minutes, I'm pretty sure. So that's really a troubling aspect of this case. I believe that the murder weapon, I don't know that it'll ever be found if it is indeed that piano leg. I'm almost hoping it's not the piano leg, so there is a chance that it could be found, or that the person, if they did get rid of it, maybe wasn't smart enough to do it on their own. And once again, if you're that person that happened to see or know what happened to that, even if it was destroyed, get that information in. Please help these guys move this case forward. This family really, really needs it. There is a thread at Reddit that is pretty decent on this. I will include down below. Also a thread at Web Sleuths, but it's only 2 pages. It's not really good. Outside of that, there is at the HelenGonePodcast.com website. There's one post in particular that she's put together that is basically all the main players and how they're related. I think it's really important to read through that if you want to look into this case more for yourself. So I'm going to have that broken out as a separate link in the description box below. That's it for today's Brain Scratch. Thank you all so much, and keep your fingers crossed. Wish me luck, because I really want to learn more about this case. I'm hoping I can get in touch with some of the family on this and maybe get some of those questions answered. I've already got a list of at least 15 to 20 questions. By the way, go ahead and kick your questions in on the comments down below. I'll be sure to go through those if I am able to get in contact with some of the family and get those questions run by them as well. And maybe we can help shake up what's going on with this case and add to what's going on already with this podcast. And I do want to say, I do wish Catherine all the luck in the world in terms of getting a good result with what she's doing here. I know I'm a bit critical of the podcast in some points in this video. I don't want that to take away from the fact that I do believe in this. I do believe in what she's doing. I do believe in what I'm doing. I do think that there's an important aspect to having this level of communication about these cases, getting other people to talk, and hopefully that nudges those people with information to come forward. So I am wishing you all the best in the world, Catherine. I do want you to crack this. And obviously for the family of Rebekah, I really feel for you guys. Take care, everyone. I'll see you back here on Monday. Not with the case cracked. We're going to do a little bit of a change. There's a special event happening in Minneapolis tonight, actually. So I'm going to be reviewing that, and it's related to making a murderer. Hope to see you back here for the video on Monday. Take care, and I'll see you then.